In this discussion, we will discuss the discussion question of explain how governments and not-for-profit entities are different than for-profit entities. If we see a discussion question like this or an essay question like this, our goal typically is to expand on the discussion or essay question if time allows that, giving us more opportunity to touch on those areas that are going to pick up points for an essay question and expand on the discussion, adding more information for a discussion question. Keeping that in mind, let's look at this one more time. Explain how governments and not-for-profit entities are different than for-profit entities. Whenever we see something like this comparing two different items, the first thing we typically do is define those two items and then look for the differences within those two items. And that's probably the best place to start for an essay question or a discussion question, but when we want to dig down and add more material as well, you also want to make sure to compare or look at the things that are going to be similar. And to do that, you often take a step back and say, well, why are these two things being compared? Are they similar in nature? Could they be grouped together in some way? And of course, there are going to be a lot of similarities between the not-for-profits, the governments, and the for-profit types of organizations. And when we think about the accounting for these types of organizations, naturally, it grew out of basically learning the accounting for, in essence, for-profit types of organizations, applying that information to the not-for-profit and governmental, and then discovering and realizing these differences and how we can better account for these types of differences for better decision making and being able to align up with those objectives. So the things that are going to be similar for a for-profit and governmental entities and not-for-profit organizations is they're all going to have basically some type of objective that's going to require us to separate what the objective is for those organizations separately from something like personal type of objectives, and then separate the bookkeeping for that so we can track in accordance with our tracking that specific objective. So for-profit types of organizations, of course, the objective is revenue generation. The object for governmental and not-for-profit organizations then differ, and that's where you might want to start off with the types of differences. The objectives between the for-profit and the governmental and not-for-profits are going to be different. And of course, the for-profits, easy to define what that objective is. It's simply for-profit. The not-for-profit organizations and the governmentals, it's a little bit more difficult to define exactly what the objective is, but we know what the objective is not. It's not simply for-profit for a particular owner of the organization. And that might better be explained by saying that the owners of a for-profit organization that invest in the for-profit organization expect to receive a return in proportion to the investment they made into the organization. The donors, the contributors for both not-for-profit organizations and governmental organizations aren't expecting a return on their investment in proportion to the amount that they put in. In other words, if we're talking about a not-for-profit type of organization, a charity, when we put something into a charity, we may expect a benefit. We may expect the charity to do something, better the community, and us to benefit from that betterment of the community. However, we don't expect a direct proportional return on the betterment of the community to us as compared related to what we put in. The same is with regard to taxes. Of course, when we put money into taxes, we're forced to do so, but at the same time, we still put the money in for taxes and we don't expect a return. We expect some type of return, but the return we expect is not going to be proportional to the amount of taxes that we paid in. So that's going to be one of the primary differences with the for-profit, where the return is expected to correlate somewhat with the contribution, and the not-for-profit and governmental entities, where the return is not expected to correlate with the contributions to those entities. Most other differences then are going to stem from that original basically difference, that difference in terms of objective between the two organizations. And then you can get into a lot of detail in terms of what are the organizations that are going to be the regulation setters for a for-profit organization, what are going to be the organizations that are going to be the regulation setters for not-for-profit and governmental type of organizations. As we think about this return on investment not having the profit motive, we also note that we don't have as much market pressure in the for-profit and governmental organizations to make sure things run efficiently. If you have people that are investing and expecting a direct return like we have in a for-profit organization, those people are very involved in regulating the situation in terms of the management of the companies because they expect a return direct with relation to what they have put in. If that is not the case, then we don't have as much market pressure and we need more transparency or accountability. So now we're going to think about how can we organize our books so that we have more accountability. We also have different users between the type of organizations. When we think about the external users for a for-profit type of organization, we're thinking about creditors and investors typically, and that's who the financial statements are made for. For a not-for-profit and governmental type of organization, we're not simply looking at people that want to do business, in essence, with the organization, but possibly the community at large, and therefore we might want to format our financial statements to look more transparent, to be able to show the community not just that we're doing what needs to be done in order to achieve a very strict objective of profit generation, but actually saying, hey, this is where we're spending our money, so people can judge whether or not the money is being spent in accordance with what they think should be the objectives of the not-for-profit organization or the governmental organization. And in order to do that, we're going to need more transparency in terms of what the inflows and outflows of the money will be, oftentimes requiring us to have something like a fund accounting type system so that we can show different areas where the money is being spent or where money is being restricted in terms of it being spent on specific type of items. All that's going to be a bit more complicated in a way that we want to keep it more open so people can see it, as opposed to a for-profit entity where really the creditors and the investors are saying, hey, we're really concerned typically with making a return on the investment, and therefore we have a lot more narrow of an objective, and therefore the reporting of it can be more streamlined actually in some cases.